Hello Year 12 and welcome to Act 1 Scene 2 of Hamlet. Same thing as last time, I suggest you have your books out with you and you're making notes as you listen. We're going to actually divide Act 1 Scene 2 into two parts as it's quite an important scene in the play and there's lots to cover, and there's also a few significant speeches that we'll be going through. So in this scene we have an immediate shift in the setting and the atmosphere. So this obviously isn't outside in the middle of the night. This is taking place in the castle in what we assume is the daytime immediately following the previous scene. We have a lot of the key players present, and the king makes a speech to all of these key players. So this is King Claudius, who is the brother of the ghost Hamlet that we just saw. So we find out in this speech a little bit about what Claudius is aiming to achieve in this play and how exactly he has already started going about this, and some hints at maybe some things to come as well. So we're opening with this monologue from Claudius, and he basically says to us that his brother Hamlet has just died and that it's only recently that he has died. So he says, "The memory be green." And he then goes on to say that it's right for us to be actually gathering together to mourn him. So he's saying to be contracted in one bower of woe. So he's saying, yep, he's died, he was our king, we should mourn. However, he moves on very quickly to say, "Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wiser sorrow think on him, together with our remembrances of ourselves." So basically he's saying, yes, it's great to remember him, but we should actually be moving on because we need to think of ourselves and our future. So it's quite a selfish attitude that he starts there with. He then goes on with this interesting line here, "Therefore our sometime sister, now our queen." So he's saying the woman who was previously my sister-in-law is now my wife. And then he serves to actually give us a reason for why he is done this in marrying his sister-in-law. So he says, "The imperial jointress to our warlike state." So he's basically saying it serves the common good by bringing the state together by us being married. And then he says, "Have we as 'twere with a defeated joy." So this is the first in the series of oxymorons that we have here. So we have defeated joy, with an auspicious and a drooping eye, with mirth in funeral and with dirge in marriage. So mirth means happiness and joy in the funeral, and then with dirge in marriage, so the funeral song in the marriage. And then in equal scale weighing delight and dole. So he's basically talking about the joy that they should be experiencing at the marriage, but the fact that they really can't celebrate that much because it would be inappropriate considering the king's died very, very recently. This is serving to actually highlight the duplicity of Claudius, which you will need to keep in mind as you keep reading. So he's in two minds, and he's telling us that right from the start. Then he says, "taken to wife," which implies that this is a marriage that is not sanctified by the church. But again, he goes on to justify that and absolve himself by saying, "Nor have we herein barred your better wisdoms, which have freely gone with this affair along." So he's saying, I've listened to all of the advice that you've given me about marrying this woman, and I've decided to take that advice on board. So again, he's justifying why this marriage has taken place. And then he says, "for all our thanks," so he's thanking them for their advice. He then moves on to further talk about the state of Denmark at this point in time. So he's already hinted to us something about the warlike state, which is what Horatio has already spoken to us about in Act 1, Scene 1. And then Claudius goes on to flesh it out a bit more here. So he says, "Now follows that you know young Fortinbras, holding a weak supposal of our worth, or thinking by our late dear brother's death our state will be disjoint and out of frame." So he's saying Young Fortinbras probably thinks that we're vulnerable at this moment, but he then goes to kind of dissuade those rumours by saying, with this dream of his advantage. So he's saying it's not a real advantage, there's no truth in that. He then says that young Fortinbras has sent them a message saying that he wants Claudius to surrender the lands that his father lost to Hamlet earlier. And we have an interesting description here, which is to our most valiant brother. Now, you guys haven't got the full story about Claudius yet, but this is an ironic quote from him. You already know that he has married his brother's widow within a very short period of time of his death, so he's not exactly the poster brother here. So that's an ironic phrase that you might need to think back to once you read a little bit more about Claudius's character. So he's saying that he's taken action to kind of stop this from happening, to stop Fortinbras from trying to take the lands back. So he says, "Now for ourselves and for this time of meeting, thus much the business is. We have here writ to Norway, uncle of Fortinbras, who, impotent and bedridden, scarcely hears of his nephew's purpose." So he's saying, basically he throws back the idea that the kingdom is weak onto Norway, saying Norway's actually weak because their ruler is bedridden, and the young son of the former king is now running around with a whole bunch of rebels, and the actual king doesn't even know about it. So he then says that he has told Norway, so the king of Norway, what is happening, and that he's saying that he is going to ask Norway to pull Fortinbras into line, basically. He then says to Cornelius and Voltaman to take the letter to Old Norway, and basically that they have the authority to hand that letter over and issue the demands, but not to engage in any other business. And so Cornelius and Voltaman agree, and then they leave. Claudius then turns his attention to Laertes and asks him what is it he's come to ask him, because he's heard a rumour that Laertes has come to ask something of him. Laertes then tells him that he has said, I've come back because I wanted to be here for your coronation, but I really would like to go back to France where I have been living, if you'll give me permission. Claudius then asks Polonius, does your son Laertes have permission to leave? And Polonius says that he has worn me down, and I'm now willing to say, yeah, he can go. The king then says, take thy fair hour, Laertes, time be thine, and thy best graces spend it all at thy will. So he basically is saying, best wishes, go off and enjoy yourself. Then he turns his attention back to Hamlet, and he says, but now my cousin Hamlet and my son. So that doesn't really go down too well with Hamlet. In his little aside there, he says, a little more than kin, a little less than kind. This is important because it shows Hamlet's attitude towards Claudius already. He is quite uncomfortable with those extra family ties that are said there. And also the reference to kin and kind means you may be my kin, but you're not the same kind of person as me. So he's already established that he doesn't really want to be associated with Claudius, but they are married. Also, just going back to Claudius's line, my cousin Hamlet and my son, he's already assuming the role of Hamlet's father, even though Hamlet's father has only recently died. And that's partially because he is now actually Hamlet's uncle and also Hamlet's stepfather. The king then says, how is it that the clouds still hang on you? So he's asking, why is it that you're so sad still? Which is quite ironic considering that he's actually the one that started out at the beginning of the scene saying that it's right that we should grieve for the lost father. But I suppose he's also established that he thinks that it's time to move on. Hamlet then replies with quite a witty reply. He says, "Not so, my lord, I am too much in the sun." So you could actually take that two ways of the clouds aren't hanging on me, I've been acting too happy for the circumstances. Or you could actually look at the little play on words that he's got there. So we have the word sun here, but it could also be a play on the word sun as in S-O-N. So that's linking back to this little phrase up here, I'm too much in the sun, I'm being associated as your son. Again, he's kind of hinting here that he doesn't really like it. Gertrude then interrupts and basically says, you've been sad for your father, but it's time that you got over your sadness and stop being so depressed about it. Basically, don't worry, because everyone's going to die one day, and so it was natural that your father died. Hamlet says, "Aye, madam, it is common," so he's agreeing, yes, everyone does die, but he doesn't elaborate on that very much. And the Queen says, "If it be, why seems it so particular with thee?" So Hamlet then replies, again, this is linking in with that idea of duplicity that we've seen before. Hamlet says, "Seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seem." So he's saying, I'm not pretending this sadness. I actually feel sad. So he's not doing this grief act as an act of duty. However, he's actually grieving genuinely. He then goes on to explain that further and says, "'Tid not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration or forced breath, no, nor the fruitful rivet of the eye, nor the dejected heavier of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly." So he's basically saying, I'm not just dressing like I'm sad, I'm not just pretending that I'm crying, because really, he then says down the bottom here, "For they are actions that a man might play." So he's saying anyone can pretend to be sad if they want to, but that's a difference between what your actions are and what you're actually feeling. So this is a really, really good quote to think about when you're talking about the idea of duplicity and the idea of appearance versus reality. So then the king replies, and it's not a particularly nice reply. However, the way he words it makes it sound like it is being nice and he's trying to give Hamlet some good advice. So basically he says, "'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these morning duties to your father." So again, he's going back to the idea of duty, which is what Hamlet was just saying. I'm not actually pretending, I am actually feeling this. And then he says that it's right for him to have grieved for his father, but that he shouldn't hang on to this grief for so long. It's our obligation to mourn, but only for a time. And so then he's talking about the idea of obligation, again, the appearance versus the actual real feeling. And then he goes on to say, "But to persevere in obstinate condolement is a course of impious stubbornness. 'Tis unmanly grief. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven, a heart unfortified or mind impatient." So he's basically insulting Hamlet, especially Hamlet's masculinity here, and saying, you don't have to sit there and be sad. In fact, sitting there and being sad for so long is very unmanly, and is also not very honourable as a thing to do. If we flick over the page, we then see his kind of chastising of Hamlet continues for quite a while through that speech. But he then actually does something new and names Hamlet as his successor. So he says, As of a father, for let the world take note, you are the most immediate to our throne, and with no less nobility of love than that which dearest father bears his son, do I impart towards you. So he's just in this section here named Hamlet as the successor for his throne, and therefore then goes on to say, for your intent in going back to school in Wittenberg, it is most retrograde to our desire, and we beseech you bend you remain here in cheer and comfort of our eye, our chiefest courtier cousin and our son. So saying, because you're going to be my successor, I don't want you to go back to school in Wittenberg. I want you to stay here. And we don't exactly know the reasons behind this now, but my guess would be that he is trying to keep an eye on Hamlet, and he almost says that outright here in the cheer and comfort of our eye. It's not really been a very cheery conversation for Hamlet anyway. The Queen, Gertrude, then backs him up by saying, let not thy mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. I pray thee stay with us, go not to Wittenberg. Hamlet replies with, I shall in all my best obey you, madam. Claudius then spends a while saying that he is happy, and he and Gertrude exit, leaving Hamlet on stage. Hamlet then launches into a soliloquy, which is a major dramatic device that is used in the play. So we get an insight into Hamlet's true feelings and true understanding of what his uncle and his mother have been up to in this point. So the first 4 lines are fairly dim, as he's actually lamenting the fact that he cannot die, nor can he kill himself. So he says, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter. So he's saying, if only I could kill myself, but God says that we're not allowed to, so I can't. And then he has a couple of lamenting explanations there. So he says, oh God, and then fie on it, fie. And he's basically saying he's fed up with the world. He's had enough of it. He moves on to start talking about the nature of Denmark at this time, and he is actually talking most specifically about the marriage between his mother and his uncle. So he says, that it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother, that he did not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. So in this, he's actually comparing his mother to a beast who is often associated with lechery. So that's when he calls her a satyr in here. And he's comparing to his father, the sun god. So he's basically saying, my mother is a lecherous beast, whereas my father was the god of the sun. He then makes a little comment here after saying how much his father loved his mother. And then he says, why she should hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. So that seems to be a little comment there on his mother's sexual desires for his father when his father was alive. But the tone then changes again as he says, and yet within a month, so he's cranky again at his mother, and yet within a month, let me not think on it. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body. So he's saying it's been so short a time period that she bought new shoes to follow his father's coffin to the funeral, but those new shoes that she bought for the funeral aren't even old yet. Okay, so it's been roughly a month since his father died, and in that time his mother's already remarried his uncle. Now, it's important to note here that he has not heard anything about the ghost, nor does he know anything about adultery, murder. All he's seen is the marriage of his uncle to his mother. He'll find out more things as they get revealed in the plot of the play. Then he compares his mother, saying, like Niobe, all tears, why she, even she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason, would have mourned longer. So Niobe is known as a woman, her children were all killed. This is in a myth. Her children were all killed, and she cried until she turned to stone. So he's saying even someone who wasn't sound of mind mourned longer for someone that she loved than my mother, who is most sane. Then he again is talking about marriage. Married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. So he's saying that his uncle is the lesser of the two brothers, and so obviously he's not really sure why his mother's entered into this marriage. Within a month, so again he's talking about the time. If you go through this and look at how many times he mentions the time period, you'll find that it's in there quite a number of times. Within a month, ere yet the salt of moist unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her gold eyes, she married. So before her tears should have even dried, she was married again. He then continues on saying not only does he not like the marriage, but it's actually a wicked marriage. So he says, "O most wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor can it come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue." So he's saying that they're incestuous cheats, as in this is a marriage that is forbidden by the church, a marriage between the sister-in-law and the brother-in-law. And then he says, it is not, nor can it come to good. So again, we have this foreshadowing here that we saw Horatio foreshadow before when he was saying that there's things going wrong in the kingdom because the ghost is appearing. And Hamlet then finishes by saying, "But break my heart, for I must hold my tongue." So he's saying, as much as I hate it, there is nothing that I can do about it in this point, so I have to stay silent. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of Act 1, Scene 2.